Welcome to a quick discussion of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. This is a DLC prequel to one of my favorite games of last year, so I wanted to go over it and reminisce a bit about the series as a whole.
All gadgets accounted for.
As a quick heads up, I won't be talking in detail about the stories of either 3 or Future Redeemed. That being said, I may reference a few things, so be aware of that. As a quick summary of my thoughts, I thoroughly enjoyed Future Redeemed. As someone who started with the very first game on Wii, I think this is a near-perfect send-off to the trilogy. However, because of that, it's also one of the toughest Xenoblade games to actually recommend. The previous games were relatively standalone, but Future Redeemed is so intrinsically linked to the rest of the trilogy that you basically have to have some knowledge of those games to fully appreciate this game. If you haven't played 1 and 2, I'd recommend them on their own merits because I think they're fantastic RPGs, but also if you're planning to play Future Redeemed, having already played 3, I would recommend at least watching the cutscenes of 1 and 2 first, so you'll have some understanding of certain character moments and story developments. These games are very long, and I recognize that not everyone has the time or patience to go through multiple 100-hour RPGs, but personally, as someone who has played about 400 hours of Xenoblade in total, I think this has been an incredibly rewarding journey from beginning to end. In a lot of ways, Future Redeemed feels like the culmination of multiple aspects of the series, and that also applies to the gameplay. In my opinion, this might be some of the best exploration in the series so far, which is saying a lot because I already really love the exploration in the older games. One thing this game does really well is bring back existing systems from the older games and integrate them into a new system. So for example, you have the Collectopedia from 1, the affinity scenes, which are kind of like the quiet moments from Future Connected, and you have the community system from Torna. All of these now tie into an overarching system called the Affinity Goals, which might be one of my favorite gameplay additions in this DLC. Basically, everything is actually tracked, and by completing specific goals, you will gain affinity points that are used to strengthen your characters. The previous games would give you experience points for finding landmarks or key locations, and you'd be able to find treasure in certain spots, but the affinity point system directly rewards exploration on a deeper level than any Xenoblade up to this point, and I really enjoy that as someone who likes to explore all of these worlds. The changes also apply a bit to the gameplay. It takes elements of 3's combat system and improves upon them in some ways. One other thing worth mentioning in terms of the exploration is the characters start out with some limitations, and there are items that unlock additional slots for gems, accessories, and arts. So again, that's a way that exploration is heavily rewarded in Future Redeemed. And again, as someone who really enjoys the exploration aspects, I think that's a fantastic decision that definitely helps to make everything a lot more satisfying. It basically ends up feeling like a very consistent gameplay loop of discovery and getting stronger in a way that ends up being incredibly fun. So let's demonstrate the combat a little bit on this enemy here. We have a lot of similarities to the base game, but we have a couple of differences. We don't have interlinking anymore, but we actually have unity attacks instead. You can set unity pairs, and once the gauge on the far left charges up, you'll be able to perform a unity combo. If you perform one when an enemy is launched, it'll also perform a bonus effect corresponding to that specific pairing. You can set up different pairings of the characters, some are better than others, I'd say, but in general, it's another way where the combat system has been subtly refined from what the base game tried. Another difference is you don't have Ouroboros forms, so the chain attacks work a little bit different. You still basically have the same systems in place where you have to build up a certain gauge and then unleash an attack, and when you set up enough characters, you'll be able to perform a special finisher for that chain attack. But one key difference with the chain attacks in Feature Redeemed is you can also get accessories that give you bonus effects, sort of like some of the heroes in the base game. So for example, some will automatically raise the chain attack gauge once you reach 100 to either 150 or 200, giving you a better rank. And others will basically boost the TP of the next character in line, and things like that. So similar effects to those that you find in the main game, but again, basically as accessories that you can find and equip to various characters. Again, that's another way in which exploration is heavily rewarded. So yeah, in general, I have high hopes for Feature Redeemed, given that Torna, in a lot of ways, improves upon a lot of 2's concepts. 2 is a bit rough around the edges in terms of gameplay at times, but it actually... But Torna manages to actually refine a lot of the rough edges out of that system, and ends up being a very good battle system. Also, the tutorials are better, which is a bonus, and I'm pretty sure you can actually read tutorials a second time, which you weren't able to do in the base game. Also, the enemy isn't launched, but will demonstrate the Unity attack anyway. So yeah, you can basically set up the different pairs. It's not like the Ouroboros forms, where each interlink is a set pair, so there's a bit more flexibility there of being able to actually set the Unity pairs yourself. So yeah, Torna, for example, introduced the ability to swap over to Blade characters and directly control them, and that was not in the original, and that, to me, made the combat system a lot more enjoyable. That being said, on the whole, I still like 2 a little bit more as an overall package, but another benefit of having a 20 to 30 hour DLC campaign is it's a lot more concise. Obviously, Xenoblade games have a bit of a notorious history of being extremely long games, and that kind of makes them inaccessible, which again is part of my concern with Feature Redeemed in terms of recommending it. Like, if you have played everything, it's an easy recommend. If, for example, you haven't even played 1, obviously you have a long way to go because these games are so long. So yeah, Torna, for example, really benefits, in my opinion, from being shorter. But again, as someone who actually does like 2 a lot, I do think it's more of a compliment to the base game rather than outright better in some ways. Again, the gameplay I'd say would be better in a lot of ways, but I do feel like story-wise, Torna doesn't really stand alone very well. It can technically be played before the base game, more so than this actually. Despite both being prequels, I do feel like Torna is a little bit more standalone while still being a little bit unapproachable. I do feel like it would give away certain details that you might want to find out in the base game first, which is why in the original plan for 2, I'm pretty sure the Torna plot was supposed to be a side story in the main game partway through, and instead it was split off into the DLC. The expansion pass for Xenoblade 3 also includes challenge battles and costumes, along with 2 new hero characters. In general, I do feel like the DLC is worth it just for Feature Redeemed. It's about $30 USD for the whole expansion pass, and yeah, for this alone, I think it's worth it. Again, the DLC for a Xenoblade game can be like 30 hours, which is as long as some, full price games essentially. So yeah, for $30, I do think this is worth it if you are already a huge fan of Xenoblade. I also really like the characters a lot. I think this might be one of my favorite casts in the series all around, though it's kind of cheating because we do have 2 returning characters with Shulk and Rex, and I actually really like their character development in this game. I feel like it's a natural extension of their characters from the previous games, while also being very, they're in character but also a lot older and more experienced in a way that gives them a slightly different interpretation that actually works really well. You also have the 2 newcomer characters, or 4 newcomer characters technically. You have Glimmer, Nickel, Matthew, and A. Honestly, the main duo of Matthew and A are phenomenal. I think they are fantastic foils to each other, Matthew being a little bit more... I don't even know how to describe Matthew, to be honest. He's a little bit more I've seen comparisons to like Ryan, for example, and I feel like that would almost be an apt comparison. Maybe like Zeke in a way, sort of maybe a little bit less outgoing than Zeke, but also sort of like a little bit more of a silly character rather than the more like serious cast of 3. So I think this actually works really well to juxtapose with 3's elements, because 3 does have more a more serious tone, and Feature Redeemed in some ways almost feels like it has a more traditional tone in some ways. And again, having returning characters does help. In some ways I almost wish there were more returning characters without going into details. There's a couple of characters I wish I'd shown off and actually don't, and I do wish that was the case, just to basically see like an updated version of some of the old characters from 1 and 2. But in general, I am really happy with what we got with this DLC. There's just a couple things I wish had been handled slightly differently, but again, I can't really go into detail because of spoilers. Yeah, Matthew and A are a very good duo. Glimmer and Nickel unfortunately end up feeling a little bit undercooked in my opinion, partly just because the rest of the cast is so strong. But they're still really good characters too, I'd say. But yeah, they just kind of don't feel as memorable just in comparison to the rest of the cast, if that makes sense. But yeah, they're not bad characters by any means. So yeah, in general, I think this might be one of the stronger casts in terms of like character moments. And I do almost wish there were more affinity scenes just to kind of give them even more time to shine. But there really aren't that many, which is kind of a shame. Again, I do feel like that would have helped to give the other characters more screen time, but it's fine as is. Obviously, the character of Matthew raised a lot of eyebrows when he was announced in a Nintendo Direct trailer, because everyone saw him and immediately thought, wow, that looks like Faye from Xenogears, which I do feel like is a deliberate comparison. I'm pretty sure Faye is also a martial artist type character, so I do feel that like that is completely intentional. In general, I actually feel like that's another reason why Feature Redeemed stands out so much, is because the Xeno series goes back farther than just Blade. There have been quite a few attempts at a multi-game anthology, and the previous 2 did not really take off. So the first attempt was obviously Xenogears. It was planned, I think, as game 5 of 6 in an anthology. I'm pretty sure it was also originally pitched as a Final Fantasy too, but ended up becoming its own thing. If I'm not mistaken, Xenogears didn't do super well, so a bunch of people left Squaresoft and ended up forming Monolith Soft. And then worked on Xenosaga, which got to 3 games, so it did better, but if I'm not mistaken, it still wasn't like the full vision they had for that storyline. I want to say they had like 7 games planned for Xenosaga or something. And then finally with Xenoblade, if you count like Feature Connected and Torna and now Feature Redeemed, they did essentially get to that 6-game anthology after all. It only took like 25 years. This year is actually the anniversary of Xenogears, if I'm not mistaken. So in that way, it is very impressive that they were finally able to pull off a complete story from beginning to end in a 6-game anthology in some way. As someone who hasn't played Gears or Saga, I really want to. To tell the truth, I really want to, especially after playing Feature Redeemed. It kind of hit me partway through how much I really like the Xeno games. Just counting Blade, to the point where I'm like, I kind of want to play Saga now. I kind of want to play Gears now. Unfortunately, these games have not been re-released recently on anything. For Gears, the most recent official version would be the PlayStation Network for PS3 and PSP and Vita. I'm pretty sure the PSP store actually went down, so you'd have to get it on Vita actually. And for Saga, that has never been re-released. Apparently Namco considered it, but shot down the idea after a while. Given that Baten Kaitos is getting a remaster this summer, that is giving me slight hope that maybe afterwards, since it seems like Nintendo and Monolith and Bandai Namco are working together on Bankaidos that maybe we'll finally get some of the Xenosaga. Though, to be fair, I don't know what we'd get. I think we'd actually get a remake. Because we've gotten a remake already. It was for DS. It was a remake of 1 and 2. Basically, 1 people like a lot, 2 is kind of like off, apparently, and then 3 is good again. So, from what I've heard, again, having not played these games, also the DS version was Japan only, by the way, from what I understand, the DS version actually cleaned up some of the problems with 2's storytelling to make it flow better with 1 and 3. So if we ever got anything Xenosaga, I think it actually would be a remake. I think it would be like some kind of remake that would basically integrate a lot of the changes that were added to the DS version of Xenosaga 2 specifically, because again, there really isn't an optimal version because of how apparently messy the second game is. Again, speaking as someone who hasn't played these games, but again, I especially want to now. I remember thinking about playing those games back in the day, but passing on them, you know, those games are definitely too expensive, and they also don't have a PS2 or a PS3 anymore. So yeah, I would like an official re-release of both Gears and Saga. Considering how many Square Enix PS1 remasters we've gotten, like Chrono Cross and like Legend of Mana, I think it's a possibility someday. I don't know if it'll be good given those games' track records, but I would love to see some kind of re-release of Xeno, all the Xeno games on current consoles in some form. But yeah, it really hit me during Feature Redeemed, with all the fan service of returning characters and elements, how much the series actually means to me. Again, I was with the series since before it even launched. I was familiar with Operation Rainfall, and so when it finally came out, I was like, I'm buying this game day one because I will never see it again. And that was the right call, because 1, I enjoyed Xenoblade 1, and 2, the game was like $150 for a while because of scarcity. So I didn't really like completely click with the series until 2. I enjoyed 1, but 2 I really resonated with, and I also really resonated with 3. I know 3 is very divisive for a multitude of reasons, mostly related to its story, but I personally really enjoyed the story of 3, and I think Future Redeemed is a perfect complement not only to 3, but also to just the entire series at this point. So yeah, this is a series that has actually meant a lot to me. I've been playing these games for over a decade now, which is kind of wild to think about how we almost didn't even get the first one overseas, that it's already it's such a beloved series that it took a lot of fighting to even get released internationally. And again, that's why everyone is British in the dub, because Nintendo of Europe actually did the first Xenoblade, and then everyone liked the British dub enough that they just kind of stuck with it for the rest of the series. And in general, I do actually like that. It definitely feels a little bit more fresh compared to a lot of like American dubs, where you end up hearing a lot of the same voice actors quite a bit because of like reusing actors in different roles. So actually having a British dub definitely gives Xenoblade a very unique identity from other RPGs. Kind of like some of the Dragon Quests also use British actors, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I do really enjoy the series. I would recommend going through all of them if you have the time to do so. Again, this is a time commitment going through multiple 100-hour-long games. But personally speaking, as someone from the very beginning, I think this has been an incredible journey, and I'm very excited to see what Monolith Soft does next. To be honest, I don't even care what they do next. At this point, I have loved the Xenoblade series so much that no matter what they end up doing next, I'm probably going to buy it day one, just because I'm pretty much convinced that'll be good at this point. But with that being said, I think that about sums up my thoughts on Feature Redeemed, and also just the Xeno series in general. So thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.